Hello and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Yesterday we started a brand new science unit about reptiles, which I'm super excited to share with you guys about. If you didn't see the video yesterday, I mentioned that I love reptiles and I have quite a few of my own at home as my pets, and I really enjoy getting to share them with other people like you guys. So I'm excited to share them with you and teach you all about them as a part of our reptiles unit. If you didn't watch the video yesterday, we learned about ball pythons and I showed you my 3 ball pythons. So if you haven't watched that yet, go ahead and watch that one first. You can get to it by going to our YouTube channel, clicking on playlists, and it's the science playlist. So go ahead and watch that one first if you haven't already. Alright, so today we're talking about a new kind of reptile, and it's a type of lizard, but more specifically, it's a type of gecko. Now, if you've heard about geckos before, you probably are thinking of maybe the gecko in the Geico car insurance commercial, or you maybe heard or seen about leopard geckos. Now, we're going to be talking about crested geckos today, and it's important that we specify which type of gecko it is because leopard geckos and crested geckos, even though they're both geckos, have totally different types of care. One of them likes being kind of high up in trees, one of them likes to be on the ground, one of them likes hot, one of them likes not very hot. So it's super important if you ever have to take care of a gecko or any animal that you know specifically what type and species it is so that they have the proper care. When animals don't have the proper care, like they don't have the right temperature or humidity, which we mentioned yesterday is the moisture level in the air, that's when animals can start to get sick and not do very well. So it's important that we know the right species so that we can take care of them properly. So today we're talking about crested geckos. Now, if you saw the video yesterday, you may have noticed that I was holding a ball python the whole time I was telling you about them. But today I'm not going to be able to hold a crested gecko the whole time that I talk about them because they're a different type of animal and they move a lot differently than snakes or ball pythons do. Crested geckos tend to jump, and if I was holding him the whole time I was talking, I would be really just having to focus on my hands and making sure he didn't jump away. So I will be getting my crested gecko out and showing him to you guys, but first I'm going to tell you about them. Then I'm going to get him out, kind of show you what he looks like, tell you a little bit more about him, and then at the end I'm going to show you his enclosure where he lives, because I think that is pretty important that you see what kind of environment these guys live in so that you can really picture it by seeing the enclosure. Alright, so crested geckos. Here's our chart back here. Where are they from in the wild? They're actually only from one known place in the whole world, which is pretty cool and crazy. So crested geckos are from New Caledonia. New Caledonia is a chain of islands, like small islands that are close to each other, by Australia. Australia is another continent that's super far away from here. It takes like almost 2 whole days to get there if you were traveling there in different airplanes. So it's really far. And crested geckos are from New Caledonia, tiny islands right by Australia, and that's the only known place in the whole world that they live, so that's really cool. What do they like to eat, you may wonder? Well, they eat fruit, different types of fruit like mangoes, apricots, and they also eat insects like crickets or little dubia roaches. It's a specific type of roach, not a cockroach, but a different type of roach that are found like in Africa, or I don't know if in the wilds that they're found like in New Caledonia, but if you have a crested gecko as a pet, you can get those little type of roaches to feed them, and they really like those. They also eat other types of insects like mealworms or wax worms that you would buy like at a pet store for them. So they eat different types of fruit and insects. I'll show you a little bit later when I show you my crested gecko's enclosure, but in captivity, which means the opposite of the wild, when you have a crested gecko as a pet, you can buy a pouch that has powder in it, and that powder has like dried out fruit mixed together with sometimes insects, also the protein, minerals and vitamins. They mix all that together in a powder form so that crested geckos have all the nutrition that they need. And what you can do is when you have the crested gecko as a pet, you can take that pouch, mix a little bit of water with the powder, and it's perfect for them because it has everything that they need. The vitamins, the fruit, the insects, and it's great. But you can also give them live insects if you have them as a pet. I love reptiles, but I'm not a big insect fan, so I don't like giving them live insects very often. I do sometimes, but not super often. So it's nice to have everything that they need, even crushed up bugs in that powder. So that's pretty cool. Most geckos, like leopard geckos that I mentioned earlier, they don't eat fruit or vegetables, so they always have to have live insects, and I don't enjoy feeding them live insects as much. So a crested gecko is a better choice for me because I don't like feeding my pets bugs so much. So if you ever wanted a gecko, that might be something you'd want to keep in mind too. All right, so we talked about where they're from, what they like to eat. Now let's talk about what kind of environment crested geckos like. So yesterday when we talked about ball pythons, we mentioned that they like it really hot. It's not the same for crested geckos. So they kind of like temperatures where we would feel comfortable. Typically in the wild, they like it warm but not too hot. And in New Caledonia, it doesn't get super hot. So they typically like it around 75 degrees. It can get a couple of degrees cooler and it can get a couple of degrees hotter, but 80 degrees would be too hot for them, where they could start maybe getting heat stroke or something like that. So they typically like it right around 75 degrees. So if you're heating their enclosure with a heat light or something like that, you would need to make sure it's on a thermostat so that it doesn't get hotter than like 78 would be the very highest you'd want it to go. They are also typically comfortable at room temperature as long as you don't keep your house too hot or too cold. I probably keep my house around like 74 degrees, so I don't usually use other heating sources for my crested gecko unless it's winter and my house gets a little cooler. Then I definitely use a light to help heat his enclosure so that he doesn't get too cold. All right, so they like it not too hot, but warm, about 75 degrees. They also like their environment kind of wet and humid. They like the moisture in the air to be about 70 or 80%. That means that they kind of need their enclosure wet. They're used to having kind of wet conditions in the wild. Now, this doesn't mean like they need to live in an aquarium because they can't like breathe underwater, but they do need it pretty wet in there. So that requires me as a responsible pet owner to make sure that my crested gecko's enclosure is nice and wet. So what I'll do is I have a sprayer, which I'll show you a little bit later, and I spray or mist down his enclosure so that it stays nice and wet, and that helps him when he sheds his skin. Most reptiles shed skin. And if his humidity wasn't high enough, he'd really have trouble shedding his skin, and it could even get stuck on his toes. And if enough skin is stuck on their toes, it can almost even need their toes removed sometime, which is really scary. But that's why it's so important to make sure that they have the right humidity and temperatures in their enclosure. All right, so they like it not too hot, but warm. They like it nice and humid. And also, crested geckos are arboreal geckos. Arboreal, this word right here, is a fancy word that means they like being up in the trees. Crested geckos don't live on the ground. They like to climb, they like to jump, and they like to be in trees and vines and leaves and things like that. So it's important that they have those things in their enclosure as well. When I show you Grover's enclosure, you'll get to see kind of the vines and things in there that he has. So those are some important facts about the kind of the care and what they need. But now I'm going to tell you a couple fun facts about crested geckos. Before I do, let me go grab mine so that you can see him. All right, so here he is. This is Grover, my crested gecko. Now another name or a nickname for crested geckos is the eyelash gecko. And the reason why is because they kind of have eyelashes. So I'm going to hold him up and see if he'll focus. Looks like he's not really focusing, but I don't know if you can tell that he's kind of got some eyelashes there. But yeah, so they're known as the eyelash gecko. A really interesting fact about crested geckos is they typically have tails, but if they get stressed or nervous at some point, they can drop their tails and make it fall off. And the reason for that is in the wild, if a predator is coming to eat a crested gecko, they can make their tail fall off, and their tail will still be jumping around even though they've made it fall off their body. And they do that as a distraction so that their predator will go for the tail and then the gecko can escape. So that's like their kind of defense mechanism, is they can make their tail drop off, it'll jump around, so the predator will eat the tail while the gecko escapes. It's like a pretty cool defense mechanism. But some geckos and lizards, if they drop their tail like that, they'll grow back. For example, leopard geckos, if they drop their tail, it'll grow back. But crested geckos, once they drop their tail, it doesn't grow back. So I'll shift him here in a second, but he's actually being surprisingly still. I was expecting him to jump around a lot more than this, so I'm gonna talk while he's sitting like this as much as I can. But Grover actually does not have a tail. He dropped his before I got him. So I don't know at what point of his life he dropped his tail, but he's actually a pretty calm gecko. Sometimes crested geckos can be really jumpy and hard to handle, and others are a little more calm, like Grover here. I was actually planning to bring Grover to the classroom, but never ended up being able to, especially now that school has closed down. But at least you get to see him this way. So here's what his little face looks like. They call these parts next to his head, here and here. They're super soft. I wish you could feel them. They're super soft and almost squishy. They call those the crests. That's why they're called crested geckos. So he's really sweet. On his little feet, which I don't know if he's gonna let me show to you, but they kind of have little sticky things on the bottom which helps them grab on. Here's his back. He's got this nice little stripes. They call that a pinstripe, which is, Santana's also a pinstripe, but different because she's a ball python and he's a crested gecko. Totally different type of reptile, obviously. But he's got a couple little spots on his back. You can see that he doesn't have a tail, but he used to. His tail probably would have been about this long. His body's probably about 4 or 5 inches long, and his tail probably would have been another 3 or 4 inches long. So total, they're about 8 inches long, but he's obviously shorter because he doesn't have a tail. It's kind of cute. They have a name for when they've dropped their tails. They call these frog butts. So technically, Grover is a frog butt crested gecko because he doesn't have a tail anymore. So if I get him to start moving, I'll show you how he jumps. Come on, Grover. Of course now he won't. When I brought him down here, he was jumping. So here he is. So you see his little crests, you see his little eyelashes. I think you can see him good at that angle there. They're like right here by his eye, his little eyelashes. You see that he's a frog butt and doesn't have a tail. Grover is a boy. He's not a girl. Yeah, he's pretty calm though as far as crested geckos go, so I was excited to bring him to school, but that's okay. Their colors are typically like, whoop, there he goes, jumping. He's right here, don't worry. I have a table that my camera's sitting on. We'll see if he'll jump to my hand. Nope, back to the table. Crested geckos, I wish you could feel him, but they're really soft. They're almost velvety feeling. So they're definitely not slimy or anything like that. You can see how he totally moves differently than the snakes, which is why I didn't want to have him out for the whole time explaining him. But they're pretty neat animals. They don't require too much care. If you have one as a pet, typically what you need to do is mist their enclosure every day with water. Oh, I wish you could have seen that jump. Jump for us. All right, you want to just hang? Okay. Don't fall. They move a lot. No. Another interesting fact, which you can see right now, I'm so glad he's doing this, is they don't have eyelids, so they actually clean their eyeballs with their tongue, which now he's not going to do it again, but at least you got to see it that one time. So if you were to have a crested gecko as a pet, They're actually pretty easy animals. You just need to make sure you're doing a couple of things each day for them. One, you definitely need to have a temperature and humidity gauge in there to make sure that the temperature is staying at 75 degrees or right around there, and making sure that you have the right humidity or moisture in their enclosure. And you can do that by spraying it down with like a mister or a sprayer, which I'll show you mine in a bit. Typically they need to be sprayed in the morning and in the evening, depending on what kind of enclosure that they have. And also they need to be fed at night, which I kind of explained before about how they have the powder that you can mix it with water and put it in their enclosure. Crested geckos are also nocturnal, so they sleep during the day and are awake at night. So if you put that kind of food for them in the morning, the food is wet, they won't be awake to eat it in the morning, and then by nighttime it's dried out. So it's important that you feed them like at night before you go to bed, because they'll eat it while you're sleeping. And I've definitely gone in late and seen him eating like in the middle of the night, so it's important that they have their wet food at night. He's gonna jump again, I feel it, yep. So they need to have their food every night, which is really easy to prepare. You just mix a little bit of water with that powder, spray down in their enclosure once or twice a day, and if you want to feed them live bugs, they will definitely appreciate it. I think the most startling thing about them, as long as you have one that is used to being handled at least a little bit and isn't too crazy, I've definitely seen a couple crested geckos that just want to run and not be held. But as long as you have one like this, the most startling part about him, he hasn't tried to bite me or anything like that. He's very nice. It's just if you're not used to that jumping, that can kind of startle you a little bit. You have to be prepared that they're gonna jump and be ready to catch them. So that's what they like do in trees and vines and stuff in the wild. So it's pretty cool. So this is Grover. He's a pretty easy, sweet little pet. If you like reptiles, but are kind of scared of them or want to start off with something easy, this might be a good option, especially because you don't have to feed them live bugs, although they definitely enjoy it. And now that you've seen Grover and learned all about him, I want to show you where he lives. Okay, so this is Grover's enclosure. This is what it looks like. You'll see that there's like water in here because, like we talked about, they need quite a bit of humidity. There's like moss and dirt, which helps keep it humid in there. There's his little water dish. He's got vines and branches and fake plants to climb on and hide in. He even has a little hammock at the top there. This little thing holds his food. There's a little bit of dried food on there that I need to clean off. And basically, what we were talking about, the powder that they eat, it looks like this. So it's like a powder that's real fruit, proteins and vitamins. This one even has insects in it. And it's a powder that you mix with water. And when you mix it with water, it looks something like this, almost like applesauce. And if you smell it, it smells really good. This one's apricot flavored. So it's actually different than the packet that I just showed you. So when I make his food, it's a little lock to keep the door shut. When I mix up his food, I put it right here in the little food holder so that he can climb on those vines and eat it. Something else cool about his enclosure, this is a mister. I'll show you how that works. Let me unlock it again. So you kind of pump the handle, kind of like a squirt gun, and then it sprays so that, I recently did that, so I don't want to get it super wet. So then it's nice and wet for him in there. And then there's a chemical called Reptile, or I guess it's not a chemical, it's a water conditioner. It takes chemicals out of water, like chlorine and stuff, and makes them safe for reptiles to drink. So I just put a little bit of that in this water before I spray it, and I put that same water conditioner in his water dish as well, so that he stays nice and safe and that the chemicals in our human water don't bother him or affect his health in any way. So that's where he lives. Alright, so thank you everyone for tuning in today to learn about crested geckos. I hope you enjoyed seeing Grover. Here he is up here now, hanging on top of his little fake plants in there. You can see how he's arboreal. and likes to hang out in trees and stuff. Anyways, what you're going to do now is you're going to fill out the worksheet about crested geckos with the information that you learned in the video today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you tomorrow to learn about another reptile. Bye-bye.